having a crisis, use that crisis as a motivation that God is telling you there needs to be a fixing in the world at large. And then how do you say, how do you fix it? Not by sadness. I'm quoting Reb Shlomo now. He says, I don't want to say anything bad about myself. Reb Shlomo was talking about himself. But I really can't stand when somebody comes to me for help and they're really depressed and they need help and they're depressed. He said, I wish they could come to me for help, but that they still have joy even though they're asking for something. He said, it's just hard for me to be around somebody who's like a schlepper that's like mamish, like holding me, like he holds onto me and drags me down. Right? There I go. We got this new microphone stand.
The Shekhinah understands.
Exactly, the Shekhinah understands. So this idea is that, yes, you're mamish down in the dumps, but God is sending you a message, and the fact that He's sending you a message, Rabbi Nachman says, that alone should be sufficient to be b'simcha. That's not the Torah I wanted to tell you about 115. If you're interested in that Torah that I just told you about, it's Torah 89 and 90. Kind of a continuation there. But getting back to Torah 115, which is the same inherent principle, is that there's two systems in which God is operating on. One is God loves justice. But in Kabbalah, justice doesn't really mean justice the way we understand, like justice. It means judgment. It means harshness, like that the world isn't just a perfect world. On the other hand, God loves Israel. And sometimes these two loves, they oppose each other. He loves you, but He's got to give you a hard time. But the thing is that God loves, He loves you even more than He needs to hurt you, to judge you. And He can't not judge you. So He said, well, what does He do? What does God do? This is amazing Torah. Thank you. So what does God do? So what God does is He does this amazing thing. In His judgment, in His harshness, in the obstacle that He gives you, in the challenge that He gives you, He puts His love into that. That might be this Talmudic idea called Yisurin Shel Ava, like suffering that is really, perhaps you could translate it as underneath it is love. This is an awesome Torah. This Torah is mamish help me. And again, if you just listen to this Torah, you could forget everything else. I said everything else is just kind of like icing on the cake. It's all good. It's all important. But this Torah is like the key. There's a verse that says, it's in Parshas Yisro, when it's describing what happened at the giving of the Torah at Sinai. It says, V'yamod ha'am merachok, and the nation stood from a distance. The people of Israel around Mount Sinai. Moshe nigash el ha'arafel ashasham ha'alokim. And Moshe went in to the dark cloud, that there was God. The dark cloud, Rabbi Nachman says, is a metaphor for depression and sadness. What does a person do when there's darkness, when there's gloom? They stand back. They're afraid. They say, I can't enter into the dark place. They don't embrace that dark place. On the contrary, they're frightened of it. But Moshe represents true understanding, true connectivity to seeing deeper than what meets the eye. And Moshe is given over to, according to Kabbalah, a little spark of Moses is put into each of us. That's our das, that's our deep knowing. So instead of just being in like, I can't get near that place of darkness, this is one of Rabbi Nachman's great teachings, that's in the darkness, that's where Moses found God. In the obstacle itself, in the hardship itself, in the depression itself, that's where God is hidden. That's the fixing. Is to find the God that loves you even in the darkness, even in the sadness. But there's only one way, through joy. That's how we transform darkness. We transform it with, what happens is to the body, you know how you feel when you're like really down? Like you could see somebody who's really depressed. They're walking, but they're not lifting their foot up. It's almost like their feet are like not lifting off the ground. They're in a cloud of sadness. That's why it says by Jacob, when he heard good tidings, it says, V'yisa, his feet lifted off, because the Rashi that says, his heart made his feet walk. So Rabbi Nachman says when we're sad, our feet, which are like the lower levels, they represent like the judgment. The judgment and sadness are interconnected. The judgment is self-judgment, it's self-doubt. It's criticism. It's the voice of Uzzah and Azal, the two angels that kind of an existential crisis of existence, who say, Ma enosh kisis karanu, who is a person of worth mentioning, meaning who has any intrinsic value. Rabbi Nachman says, on a play on the Rambam, Maimonides, who says that there's only one existence that is mechuyev b'metziut, which means his existence is obligatory, it's essentially one that must be, and everything else is not of necessity, but of created rather than always there. That's God. We are efsher. We are the possibility of existing, and God chose to make us exist. Rabbi Nachman takes that idea and says, when we connect to God, when we do what it is that God puts us in this world to do, we become mechuyev b'metziut. Then our existence, that answers the existential crisis of why am I here? So Rabbi Nachman at the core, even though he has many Torahs that you're going to learn with Rabbi Sutton, so I can't, it's really connected to this shir, but I'm allowing this shir and Rabbi Sutton's shir to probably be almost like one, because I can't really talk too much about the Nekuda Tova, the good point, which is essential to understanding really what I'm talking about being happy, but that's Rabbi Sutton's talk, so I'm going to leave that, but we'll just say that that's critical to being happy. But I will share this idea with you. His ideas might be about no matter how little you've done, you're still good enough. But I'm going to share this idea. That when you take something on, when you take on a mitzvah, so then all of a sudden that gives your life intrinsic value, because the mitzvah is coming from the existence of the divine, which is intrinsic, essential. Not secondary, not something that could or could not be, but it has to be. So we become part of that. But paradoxically, there has to be a moment of non-existence before your existence is kind of validated on the deepest level. So for example, Rabbi Nachman talks about the void. The tzimtzum. The tzimtzum is a metaphoric idea, an academic circles, people are now debating if Rabbi Nachman says that Tzimtzum is actually a metaphor or real. But it's a real metaphor. That for God to be able to create a world in which people exist and feel their own existence, that God had to, or did, conceal himself, conceal his light. And then into that emptiness, he drew a ray of light, it's called the Kav, and then the worlds, the Olamot started. That's essential in the Ari. If you learn Eitz Chaim, that's like a big part of how, that's just the beginning, everybody has heard of that. But what Rabbi Nachman says is he takes that teaching and he applies it to a person. That a person needs to make a tzimtzum within their own heart. They have to contract their own heart and take away the infinite light. You see, because Rabbi Nachman says this world is not about infinity. It's about the vessels. We're learning about this 2 weeks ago. That the mitzvahs are all limited revelation of God. Because if they were infinite, why would I have to do a finite thing? But God gave us specific ways of grasping Him, so they must be. But it's also like that with people. So, Rabbi Nachman says, for example, it's a Torah, "V'libi chala b'kirbi," my heart is empty within me. King David said, "My heart is empty within me." But Rabbi Nachman says, I make an opening in my heart by creating a place of finiteness, of recognizing my own finiteness, but because of that I'm then able to bring in somebody else. Because I recognize I am mine, you are you. And I can accept you for being you on my limited level. So, but what happens then when you want to have something infinite and finite? She says that's a marriage, for example. So a marriage has, the chassan circles around the kala 7 times. That's like makif, that's like surrounding. It's also fixing the 2 eyes, the 2 ears, the 2 nostrils, the mouth. It's creating a light by transforming our ordinary sensory perception and saying, okay, I'm going to elevate it. But then the kala gives, the custom is for the kala to give the chassan a talus. A talus represents infiniteness. When you're in the talus, you're totally surrounded. It's not like one mitzvah you do, like you eat matzah, the matzah goes into your mouth. Right? You shake the lulav and esrog, it's held in your hands. You put on film, you wrap it. You light the Shabbos candles and you see it. This is like, mamish, it's around you. Which means that even though I make myself finite to be in a relationship, Rav Shlomo explains that every relationship needs finiteness and infinity. Needs the or and the kav, or the tzimtzum and the kav, actually. The concealment that allows for the finiteness of being, and that's what gives us the capacity to deal with the little things, which are tedious, which can be hard and challenging. But it also gives us the light. It gives us something of transcendence. That's ideally. So we have to remember that. I'll tell you, that's a secret of how to have a good relationship. The secret of how to connect with somebody is to try to connect on both levels. Love, transcendence, and common values that can get me through the challenges of actual living, the vessels of life. So if I can get it on both levels, gewalt. Sometimes you have one without the other, and then they affect each other. You'll love somebody, but you can't make the vessel, and then how much can you love them when you can't live with them day to day? And vice versa, sometimes you can make the vessel, but you don't have the transcendence, and then it's hard. So again, this is the ideal, and it goes like that for everything. It's not just for a husband and wife, or siblings, or parent and children. It's like that in every day, really. It's like that with your work. You might love the idea of what you do, but the execution, the small things that come with it, I don't have the capacity. I want just excitement, right? Okay. So I'm just going to conclude with a couple practical things to do. When you're sad, or even before you're sad, when there's something that needs to be addressed that could make you problems in your life, that could make you sad, here's what you can do. You can pray. And the way that you can pray is you can speak to God as a person who speaks to a friend. No, it doesn't hold. Maybe that. That's what this thing. You have to speak to God, Rabbi Nachman says, the way you would talk to another person. But the way to do it is you can't do it in Shul. People will think you're crazy. They'll kick you out if you're lucky. They'll send you to institution if you're unlucky. So instead, go to a private place where there's nobody around, preferably at a time when it's not busy, not rush hour, like early in the morning or at night, and use your own words to daven, to speak to God. So that's the first step. And that'll help you. And remember what we said before. See it as part of the cosmic imbalance in the universe of the Shekhinah, that God is sending you a message and He's giving you the privilege to deal with His problems, but He's choosing you. And how do you accept if a king, if the president says, I need you to do something. If you say, I don't want to, if you come with sadness, it's like, forget it. I don't need you. You're not the person. So again, accept your mission with joy. And remember that God is hidden in the gloom. He is sending you the message. And how do you deal with it? The finite and the infinite. The balance. You have certain things, just like the slowness of the dragging of the feet, which is the sadness, that have to be overcome by simcha, by joy, where you lift your feet, where your heart lifts your feet. So happiness has to embody itself in physical movement, clapping and singing and dancing. And that's very important to Rabbi Nachman.